Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 20th of November. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information from the National Weather Service, serving your part of Alaska anytime, simply by calling 1-800-472-0391. That's our Alaska Weather Information line. Find us on the web at weather.gov/Alaska or on social media, NWS Alaska on Facebook, NWS Anchorage, NWS Fairbanks, and NWS Juneau. Always online for you. And if you haven't subscribed to Twitter alerts from the National Tsunami Warning Center, make sure you do that. Just type in NWS NTWC, National Tsunami Warning Center for short. You should be able to find that pretty easily, and then set up your Twitter alerts. It's a great tool. David.Snider@NOAA.gov is an easy way to find me online, and if you have a question about what you see here tonight or any weather questions around Alaska, I'm happy to serve you in any way I can. Here's a look at our weather situation across Alaska today. In the upper Tanana Valley and the 40-mile country, we're looking at about 4 to 6 inches of snow. A winter weather advisory is posted until about 9 o'clock on Thursday. As a result of the changing weather there, we expect the winds to come up a little bit. Visibility may come down a little bit, and we expect to see snow continuing there through the evening and overnight hours. But there's already been some sizable reports there, I believe, around Eagle, picking up at least about 4 inches of snow today. A look a little bit further north shows us that the eastern Beaufort Seacoast is also under a winter weather advisory. That'll go until 6 o'clock in the morning. Expecting the winds to bring visibility down from time to time, maybe as much as a half mile or so. Not expecting a tremendous amount of wind, but it looks like a visibility and snow falling there, maybe another 2 inches or so, could bring visibility down during that period. So tonight and overnight, and then improving by tomorrow. For the Bering Sea Coast, winter weather advisory for you. Now, in this case, gusts will be blowing. It looks like we could see up to about 40-mile-an-hour gusts with this, on top of another couple inches of snow. That'll go until 6 o'clock in the morning. For the Shishmaref area, with the winds coming in, we do expect to see some minor coastal erosion there. There's no warnings or watches or advisories posted for that just now, but it does look like the winds again coming through the region might bring up the surf just a little bit more than normal, and because of that, some minor issues could be seen there around Shishmaref. Now, if you have damage, whether you're in Homer or Gamble or Shishmaref or Kaktovik, if you have damage, relay that information through your village safety officer and have them relay that back to the National Weather Service in Fairbanks, or you can just go online and let us know. There's a Submit the Storm Reports link on all of our websites. Let's look at the bottom of the screen, scroll down, and fill out that form, and that dings our computer and says, hey, something's going on here, and we think you need to know, and we would like to know because that helps us do a better job for you in return. So pictures are great, stories are good, and information is always, always helpful, so thank you in advance. Here's a look at the satellite picture across the region. You'll notice this broad circulation across all of Alaska. We have an upper-level low sitting on top of us pretty much, and underneath that, several other circulations dancing around this in a circle. As that happens, each one of these lows is reinforcing precipitation in the north and eastern Gulf Coast. We have a steady stream of moisture coming up through the southern third or so of southeastern Alaska. A storm moving from east to west across the North Slope. That's bringing snow and wind to the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. And you can see another circulation here moving into the YK Delta. That's dragging in colder air into places like Shishmaref, St. Lawrence Island, and certainly the northern Bering Sea. On top of that, a new system is trying to make its way in across the North Pacific. You'll see that a little bit later on in our surface maps as a next developing storm. Here's what we see today. Low pressures up across the North Slope at 997 millibars. That's bringing in that easterly flow across the North Slope and bringing in more of a westerly flow across the interior. The winds across the interior aren't too terribly bad, and there are some areas of snow showers across the Susitna Valley all the way up toward the parks. A big issue across South Central today has been the developing of fog early this morning, and then the worsening of that as the day has gone on around the Cook Inlet region. So you may have noticed that. Hopefully that's not slowing you down too much. Snow continues across the Alcan border, including the upper Tanana Valley and the 40-mile country. A front moving across southeast has a lot of rain attached to it, but the focus for that's really across the southern third. Already seeing some improvements across the northern parts of southeast. Across the west coast, northerlies are coming down, and you can see those showers of snow there. It's also helping to improve the ice conditions across the Chukchi, so make sure you check in with that for your marine forecast coming up here in just a little bit. As we get into tonight, low pressure sitting outside of Prince William Sound at 990 millibars will continue the flow of moisture across the north and eastern Gulf Coast. High elevation snow across the Chilkoot and White Pass region into the Copper River Valley. Southwest snow showers continue there, but overall it's the northerly winds I think you'll notice more than anything across the western Capes and through the Bering Strait, as well as places like Shishmaref, again with some minor coastal erosion occurring there. Across the north slope, watch for that easterly flow. It's going to be windy enough that we've added our little crossed arrows there, and that simply means blowing snow could be reducing visibility where you are. Frontal boundary sitting just north of the Brooks Range will keep the focus of that colder east wind generally out of the interior for now. You can see a brief break in the clouds and the storm pattern thanks to high pressure here across eastern Asia, and then here comes our next Pacific storm gradually sneaking its way into the picture as that ridge shifts eastward ever so slightly. The focus is still on low pressure across most of the mainland as we go through Wednesday. Southerly winds into southeastern Alaska, more of an onshore flow coming into Prince William Sound and the Kenai Peninsula. Really nothing too out of the normal for northern parts of the Gulf. Out across the west, we're in our west and northwesterly flow, and that's going to keep fog across some parts of the YK Delta, especially around Norton Sound there. So plan for that. Showers continue around the Pribilofs and just east of the Alaska Peninsula. Some breaks in the clouds around the Koyukuk Valley and southward toward Galena, but just east of that, we're going to continue showers of snow all the way from the Alaska Range southward toward Lake Iliamna, and snow and blowing snow is still possible on the North Slope tomorrow. Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, it looks like snow will continue across the eastern Brooks Range. Some breaks in the clouds there around Utqiagvik, southward toward AKwx, and then even further south toward Ambler. But do watch for blowing snow to be an issue there. That could reduce visibility around the Chukchi Coast into Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound. Snow will be a little bit more predominant there, and then just south of that, it's warm enough for rain showers around Nunivak Island, the Pribilofs, and the Yukon Delta will be going back and forth, probably more of a rain-snow mix than anything substantial. Just to the south of Adak, a 978 millibar low, though, is still deepening as this is tracking eastward. This is going to become the predominant player for the Gulf pretty much from Friday night into maybe Sunday, and sit here and deepen even more, and then eventually work its way toward Prince William Sound, it looks like. So we'll keep an eye on how that's developing, but it does look like that storm will continue to deepen as we go into the weekend for those interested in the Gulf. Around southeast, low pressure here is gradually sneaking its way eastward at 986 millibars. It's going to keep more of an offshore flow for most of the region over southeastern Alaska, but we're going to watch this pressure gradient here across the Lynn Canal. I would expect gusts to start coming up there as we get into your Thursday and Friday. Generally dry weather as we get into Wednesday, Thursday for south central, but again, weather will be changing as we head toward the weekend. Quick check of your temperatures for Wednesday morning. Upper 30s to about 40 degrees for southeast, south central, below freezing in the mid to upper 20s, nearly 30 around Kodiak, 35 in Cordova. Fairbanks looking at 12 degrees, 17 in snow in Eagle, 4 for Fort Yukon, 0 for Arctic Village, single digits for the North Slope, including Kaktovik and Utqiagvik. Looks like about 19 in, let's say Kotzebue, and 22 around Wales and Twin City, 24 around Nome, lower 20s for St. Lawrence and St. Lawrence Island. Around McGrath, probably temps in the upper 20s there. Healy about 11 degrees. Southwestern temperatures back in the mid-20s, with high temperatures tomorrow, teens and 20s for most cases, colder up north.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to aviation weather now. IFR conditions will be fairly widespread here for your Wednesday morning. A decent amount of low cloud cover will be present across the region. North and eastern Gulf Coast locations are also going to see a lot of cloud cover and poor visibility, with MVFR fairly widespread across the Gulf and into central and southern parts of southeast. As we get into the west, you'll notice considerable areas of MVFR for the Bering Sea, with some breaks generally west of the Pribilofs and out toward the central and western Aleutians. By Wednesday afternoon, IFR conditions continue to be fairly widespread across the interior, but you can see some improvement across the west coast. The northern and eastern Gulf Coast still looking at generally MVFR conditions, but IFR lingers around the Chilkoot and White Pass, Portage Pass up toward Tanita Pass, and some of your northern and eastern Alaska Range passes. Out to the west, a fairly widespread MVFR from the west coast all the way through most of the central and western chain. By Thursday morning, IFR conditions are expected to hold across the interior. Again, a lot of low cloud cover here and there. The Chukchi Coast, the Seward Peninsula, and the YK Delta, a little more hit and miss there. South Central should see some breaks across the Susitna Valley and westward toward Lake Iliamna. It looks like MVFR will be fairly widespread for the central and eastern Gulf, but do expect some breaks on the inside passage areas there and around Kodiak Island. As we get into your Thursday afternoon, more breaks expected for southeast and south central all the way up through the Susitna Valley. As you get up toward the Yukon Valley, though, fairly widespread MVFR with IFR conditions across the Brooks Range, parts of Southwest, and the upper Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon Valley should also be looking at least some areas of IFR, hit and miss IFR across the central chain with generally MVFR conditions for the Bering and the Aleutians. Here's a look at your pass conditions now. Anaktuvuk Pass and Adigan Pass, we expect to see IFR throughout the day. As we get into Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, look for some transition over toward IFR and MVFR. As we get to Rainy Pass, IFR conditions there. Windy Pass also expected to be instrument flight rule throughout your Wednesday. Isabel Pass expected to hold at IFR through most of the day. Mentasta Pass also looking to be IFR. And Tanita Pass also expected to be instrument flight rule most of the day. Portage Pass will at least be marginal and probably on the east side IFR, and some of that could trickle into the western side, so keep your eye on that one. And Chilkoot and White Pass holding at IFR throughout the day. Surface freezing line is pretty much in the same old spot, coming down through southwestern Alaska, south central, and then right now just generally along and north of Capital City. As we get into the Gulf, levels aloft are between 2 and about 4,000 feet for most of southeast. And you can see the next Pacific storm already pushing freezing levels up across the central and western chain to about 2 to 4,000 feet, and certainly they'll climb higher as we go through the remainder of the week. Icing potential is hovering around 2,000 feet and above for the North Slope and into the Copper River Valley, the upper Tanana, all the way out toward southwest Alaska and the Kenai Peninsula, and central and southern parts of southeast generally above about 7,000 feet. And then out west, you can see above 5,000 feet for areas around Adak and Atka as we go. There is some drier air trying to move in before the next weather maker comes our way. Here's a look at the jet stream now, and you can see a ridge of high pressure sitting across the west coast. This seems to be shifting just a little bit. Predominant trough across most of Alaska there, low pressure across the North Slope all the way to south central, guiding in a pretty fast track of air, 115 to 135 knots. What's coming our way from the west? Well, another storm digging here out in the Pacific is going to guide a pretty hefty storm across the North Pacific, giving a little bit more of a south flow toward the end of the week and the weekend here for most of mainland Alaska. At 9,000 feet, you can see right now low pressure sitting over the mainland. That means more of a northerly flow across the west coast, 30 to 35 knots there. For southeast, a south and westerly flow coming inland, anywhere from 10 to 15 knots. The interior winds holding between about 10 and 25, some of the strongest right over south central at the moment. At 3,000 feet, you can see low pressure guiding in that east northerly flow, wrapping around low pressure for the interior. You can see wind speeds here over the Nunivak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, holding around 15 to 25 knots. Out west, a building southerly wind coming across the western chain, 25 to 50 knots. They're signaling our next weather maker moving in. Wind speeds coming into southeast right now, generally pretty light at 3,000 feet, 5 to 10 knots there. Putting it all together, then, turbulence potential looks like this. The North Slope generally below 4,000 feet, mostly for the Beaufort Seacoast, a little bit of chop through the Bering Strait and the southwestern capes, but the real focus for considerable moderate will be from about Castle Cape to Chignik and westward all the way to Sandpoint, Cold Bay, False Pass. That region there, you're looking at a little bit more bumps over the mountains and also across the central and western chain, all of that below about 3,000 feet. For southeast, we'd expect more of an issue generally south of Port Alexander toward Craig, Klawock, not maybe as far east as Ketchikan, below about 4,000 feet.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limmendisk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time, compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols, dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And time for your marine weather now. Looking at today's sea ice edge, not a whole lot of change around the Beaufort Seacoast. The ice edge is still expanding to the west there, moving into the Chukchi Sea. And you can see this entire area is kind of shrinking in slowly on itself, as it should be for this time of the year. But we're still looking at some fairly warm temperatures up across the Bering Strait region and certainly down across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coastline in the northern Bering. But the good news is that the temperatures are coming down, and we're certainly seeing water that is pretty much primed and ready to freeze once the winds let up a little bit more across the Chukchi coast. The other good news is the outlook has been posted for the next 3 months, so make sure you head to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. Click on Outlook and you'll be able to read what the Sea Ice Program for Alaska thinks is going to happen as we move through the remainder of winter. Should be some really usable information there for you, especially in northwest Alaska and around the Bering Strait. On to southeast now. Winds will be fairly light across the central and southern interchannels, only 5 to 10 knots there. Small seas as well, even for the Lynn Canal. Northerlies there, a little bit more like 15 knots or so. Southerlies coming up the outer coast around 15 knots with about 7 to 9 foot seas on Wednesday, and on Thursday winds come up a little bit more from the offshore areas. Looks like 20 to 30 knots across offshore, 25 knots in the northern Lynn Canal, and north and easterly winds for the central and southern interchannels, gusts up to 35 for the Stevens Passage region with 4 foot seas there on Thursday. South Central, not too bad initially. The northern Cook Inlet region and Prince William Sound still holding around 10 knots or so with about 2 foot seas. North and northwesterlies coming down central and southern parts of Cook Inlet, 5 to 7 foot seas over the Barrens, and east and southeasterly flow in the northern Gulf. By Thursday, winds really don't kick in just yet. We will start to see winds moving in a little bit stronger over the Barrens, 25 knots, 6 to 7 foot seas there, 10 to 15 knots for all other areas, and generally about 2 to 4 foot seas expected through your Thursday, Thanksgiving Day. For Wednesday, stronger winds, higher seas out across the southern Bering, especially down the Bering Sea coast of the Alaska Peninsula. 9 to 14 foot seas there with a 25 to 30 knot onshore wind coming out of the north and northwest. Those winds make it over the mountains a little bit more, 20 to 25 for the Kodiak Island region. 5 foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait, 8 to 10 foot seas down the Pacific coast for Wednesday. For Thursday, it looks like winds shift a little bit more to the north and east. High pressure is trying to move in, and it's responding to low pressure coming in from the west. Look for northwesterlies over the island, northwesterlies from Castle Cape to Chignik all the way down toward Perryville. A little bit more of an easterly push, 15 to 20 in all areas, and you're looking at winds and seas coming up to about 5 to 6 feet, I should say. For Wednesday, across the Aleutians, you can see the effects of high pressure still trying to hold things down and slow it down just a little bit. Northeasterlies across the eastern chain, easterlies across the central chain, and east and southeasterlies bending into the next storm. 30 to 45 knots out across the west, 13 to 18 foot seas there. For the central and eastern chain, 8 to 11 foot seas and 7 to 11 foot seas for the Pacific coastline there on Wednesday. Thanksgiving Day, low pressure coming in across the North Pacific. Look at those northeasterly, wow, they really slowed down, didn't they? How about that? Low pressure is going to focus a lot of its energy down here across the south. Across the central chain, winds come up to about 40 knots, 17 to 18 foot seas there. And across the east, 9 to 14 foot seas with a 35 knot wind. And this is Thursday, Thanksgiving Day. The highest seas and winds will be a little bit further to the north. For the west coast, looks like north and northwesterlies coming down the region, and northeasterlies inside the Pribilofs there with a 9 foot sea. In the Norton Sound region, 20 knots over the open water, 3 foot seas expected there. North and northwesterlies coming down across the Yukon-Kuskokwim coastline there. Northwesterlies in the Kuskokwim Delta with a 10 foot sea. For Thursday, winds actually slow down just a little bit more. They diminish for Norton Sound all the way to Nunivak Island in the Kuskokwim Delta. 15 knots with about 3 to 4 foot seas expected. The stronger winds and higher seas will be a little bit closer to St. Matthew, St. Paul, and St. George with a 7 foot sea on that 25 knot wind for your Thanksgiving Day. For the North Slope, look for north and easterly winds over the Beaufort Sea Ice. An offshore flow for most of the Chukchi Coast, 15 to 20. Northwesterlies still coming into the Kotzebue Sound region, so minor coastal erosion still possible in places like Shishmaref there with a 9 foot sea along the coast. And Thursday, northeasterlies over the ice again for the Beaufort, 15 to 25. An offshore wind continues for the Chukchi. Still looking at that northerly wind coming into northern parts of the Seward Peninsula again, so we'll be watching Shishmaref as a result of that. Tonight's weather shows low pressure sitting across the northern Gulf. Rain showers continue across the north and eastern Gulf. Snow across some parts of the upper Tanana Valley and the 40-mile country. Winter weather advisory continues for you with already 4 inches of snow in there. That'll continue to 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Winds and snow for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Visibility could be down there as well as areas in the Bering Strait region, St. Lawrence Island, the western end of the Seward Peninsula, and watching for coastal erosion around Shishmaref with a continued north wind as we go through Wednesday and into Thursday as a developing Pacific storm gets closer to the chain. Have a good night.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.